This is the Full Steam Ahead podcast, and we've been full steam ahead in Stockton this year as we've been celebrating the 200th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And I'm joined today by two people who know an awful lot about the Stockton and Darlington Railway. Chris Lloyd, who is well known to people from your writing in the Northern Echo and local history and so on as well, and Niall Hammond, the chair of the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. So I know that, like me, both of you were on the platform at Stockton Station just a couple of weeks ago when Locomotion number 1 came into view. And so I just wondered, what did you think of that? I mean, so Niall, it must have been really the culmination of a huge amount of work to see that point actually happen.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's something which, although it moved very slowly, has taken the best part of 10 years to come to fruition. So that journey from Shildon to Darlington and then finally reaching Stockton on that morning. And the weather was fantastic as well, which is something you can't plan for. So, a wonderful time.
Yeah, and the platforms were packed as well, weren't they, Chris?
They were lots of, and all the places at Rochester Road. There was really good turnout, and indeed all of the length of the line. There seemed to be a lot of people turning out. Niall and I were in Banktop Station in Darlington at some ridiculous hour in the morning. It was about 2:30 a.m. When they brought Locomotion number 1 in to Banktop Station and parked it up alongside an Azuma train, and LNER floodlit the dome of the station in bright corporate red, and that was well attended as well. So all hours of the day, we've been looking at old trains.
That was replicating, as I understand, it was replicating something that happened on the 100th anniversary as well, wasn't it? Is that right?
Well, the whole celebration of the 100th anniversary was bringing Locomotion number 1 alongside a 1925 steam engine as well. So they like that symbolism right from the early days of where it began with what.
Yeah, because it's always been, ever since they started celebrating it, so 1875, 1925, 1975 and now 2025, it's been as much about innovation and technological change as it has been about celebrating old stuff, because that's exactly what the SNDR was when it first opened. It was all about ingenuity and engineering. I mean, the ingenuity, Chris is referring to the 1925 celebrations, and yes, they had the latest steam engines and things on display there, but they still managed to get Locomotion number 1 to work by putting a petrol engine in the tender and some oily rags in the funnel just to make sure it could actually still travel along the line.
I think actually the oily rags in the funnel were a bit of a feature this time as well, because I understand Locomotion number 1 was running on smokeless coal.
Yes, and it had the number 54 on the front, which is the number from the 1925 parade. Yes, they did.
We've enjoyed the 200th anniversary celebrations, but and we know that the legacy of the Stockton and Darlington Railway was something people recognised at the outset as well. And I can see you've got something in front of you there, Niall. That was from the centenary. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean the various celebrations every 50 years. Have always produced items, souvenirs, tokens and things. This is a beautiful little cast bronze medal which was produced for the 1925 celebration. So we've got Vulcan there holding Locomotion number 1.
Do you want to pass that round and I'll take a look at it? And maybe we can...
And saying first in the world. And then on the back, Edward Pease and George Stephenson with the coat arms of Stockton and Darlington.
Yeah, so where were these medals issued to at the time? Maybe I could just hold that up there. So where would these have been issued to?
I think some of them were issued in Swindon, actually, for the
railway
workers there.
Railway workers
but they're quite nice. I think they go to quite important people, don't they?
Yeah. The whole subject of commemoration is a really interesting one.
Beautiful.
I mean, at the 1875 celebrations, they held a big feast in a tent at Featon's, which all the important people...
That's in Darlington, for those people who are not familiar with the local area.
All the important people were invited to, but it's a sign of the times, is that they were terribly enlightened about the ladies' presence, that all the gentlemen sat down to the feast, and there was a viewing gallery for the ladies to sit in to watch the gentlemen enjoying the feast. Time moves on. But,
absolutely right.
My favourite souvenir is from the 1975 celebrations when they sold empty cans of Locomotion number 1 steam for 50p, I believe. And I was talking to Bob Cook on Stockton Station, and he said he remembered Amos Hinton selling empty cans of Rocket steam. So rocket, of course, got nothing to do with it.
Yes,
And so it's a little bit embarrassing that Amos Hinton had backed the wrong engine, even in 1975.
Yeah. So again, Bob Cook, for those people who don't know, he's recently retired and long-serving council leader here in Stockton. So look, we've definitely been marking these anniversaries from time to time, but I mean, clearly we can see the effect of the Stockton. Sorry, Jack's just making an appearance. We can see the effect of the Stockton and Darlington Railway all around the world. The rollout of high-speed rail and around the world, and the place everyone's looking to now, of course, is China. And do we see any similarities between super fast bullet trains in China and the train that trundled down the track in Stockton?
The influence and the acknowledgement is still there. So the 2025 celebrations have been organised through a fantastic partnership of Durham, Stockton and Darlington councils, plus Network Rail, National Rail Museum, a whole variety of others. And in spring this year, we received an invite from China's oldest railway to visit, to forge cultural links. So we went over. They were incredibly hospitable, and we saw lots of modern technology as well as historical stuff. But the thing that really impressed us was they're rolling out huge amounts of high-speed rail, but it's still to Stephenson's 4-foot, 8.5-inch gauge. It does 350, 400 kilometres an hour, but the influence is still there. And in the National Railway Museum in Beijing, the first panel tells you about modern railway started on the Stockton and Darlington Railway in 1825.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So that's recognised maybe more in Beijing than some parts of the UK, and the standard is set. And also, I don't think it's too great a claim to make that time zones ultimately were set by the Stockton and Darlington Railway. Because, of course, the timetable set UK time, which ultimately, means that when you go to China, you have to sort of change your time while you're flying there, because Stockton and Darlington Railway set the time zones around the world.
Yeah, if you run a railway, you need standardised time, because there's no point having a train leave from one end at a different time to another end. So before the railways, Bristol, London and Darlington and Stockton times were all slightly different.
Yeah. So Leeds in the northeast, I think, was 6 minutes behind London. And so if you're running a 10 o'clock train that's kind of got a 6-minute differential, it's going to be chaos.
I guess when you were running stagecoaches, or
it didn't matter because it took days to travel that sort of distance. So, but now you're going in hours.
So you can see the picture behind me, Stockton Town Hall, and people would have been adjusting their town hall clocks up and down the country as a result of the railways coming to town ultimately to make sure that everyone's stuck to the same time.
Yeah, that's right. Darlington has briefly has a time gun that is attached by a cable going underneath the main line to London in the 1860s, and it's into the Greenwich Mean Time, into the Greenwich Observatory, and at 12 noon on a Monday, the head timekeeper in Greenwich sends a message up to Darlington that it is 12 noon. The station master sets his watch, and then he saunters over to the gun, and at 1 p.m. he fires the gun, and you can imagine the whole town dashing to their clocks to set them to the latest railway time. And it can, Britain is the first country in the world to have standardised time because the railways demanded it.
And that standardised time led to, when we got industrialisation, led to standardised shifts in factories and all of these things as well. So ultimately changed people's way of life completely from, getting up when the sun comes up to clocking on when the shift starts.
Yeah, and the other thing that we haven't touched on, but is that for the first time now you've got a cheapish railway that's running fastly. You can have commuting for the first time. You no longer have to live and work in the same town. So in 1827, we have records from Hyington Station of people who live out there commuting as far as Stockton to go to work. One's wonderful. A bell hanger, is he? Bell Smith.
There's a few of them, but the wonderfully named Archibald Knox is possibly the first recorded commuter. Because at Hyington, they can't get a licence because the local magistrates, who are heavily invested in the turnpike roads, won't give them a licence. So they have effectively a public inquiry where they get people along to say how they are using the railway. So Archibald Knox and a few others say what a great convenience it is. It allows them to travel from there to Stockton and Darlington for work.
Do we know what his work was?
Well, suspiciously, he becomes employed by the Stockton and Darlington Railway about a year later. So he may have had a vested interest.
Well, it was railway consultant, maybe. Possibly. Yeah. For some reason, when you said he's a railway commuter from Hyington, I couldn't picture him in a bowler hat with an umbrella. But then there we are. That's 1950s commuter, rather than 1850s, perhaps. But yeah, so maybe it was a good piece of kind of railway PR as much as anything else. But yeah, world's first railway commuter from Hyington to Stockton. There we are. So the when you sort of mention innovation as well, Niall, I mean, this is something that's really struck me when I've been looking at the details of how Locomotion Number 1 and the Stockton and Darlington Railway got off the ground. And I think we look back now and think it was a remarkable historical achievement. But I think people knew that at the time as well. When you look at the way that, you know, the celebrations of the first rail being laid here in Stockton at that time, people knew they were onto something big, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, people talk about the shock of the new. You know, it's been going on for a long time, and railways. I mean, railways. You could talk about railway history for a long time. There's probably more railway history before the Stockton and Darlington Railway than there is after it. People have been putting things on rails, wooden rails, all sorts of things, probably going back to the 16th century. But the thing with the Stockton and Darlington is that all these people who'd experimented with engines and railways and different types of metal and things, none of it really worked that well. It was single purpose from a coal mine to a staithes, and then when the coal was used up, the line got used up. The genius of the SNDR was bringing together lots of different technical engineering innovations and business acumen to make the thing a complete system. And that's the thing that really changed things and would have impressed people, right from when Thomas Maynell laid the first rail just outside St John's Well at one end of Stockton High Street, right through to the opening day when it finally came clanking down the line.
So, yeah, that technical innovation's there, but you mentioned business innovation as well. And from the start, they were thinking they would move people as well as goods. And I think that's the sort of slightly surprising thing, isn't it?
Well, yes, there's the very famous Stockton and Darlington Railway Amending Act of 1823, which is when they... so originally they weren't sure what the motive force was going to be on the line, but then Stephenson comes along and they decide it's going to be steam power, so they have to go back to the House of Parliament, House of Commons, to get the permission to make it a steam-powered line. And that Amending Act, which is very, very boring, Clause 7, goes on for hours and hours, and it's just a single sentence with no punctuation, but it has two words in it that locomotives are going to be used, and among the things that are going to be moved are passengers. And this is the first time that Parliament gives permission for locomotives and passengers in a railway act. In fact, the word locomotive was so new that when the draft for the bill was presented to the House of Commons secretary, he tried to strike it out because he did not know what the word locomotive was. He thought it was some weird and unheard of animal. And so he struck that clause out of the Act, and they had to persuade him that locomotive was an industrial machinery rather than an exotic creature from outer space.
Well, that's really interesting, Chris. I mean, I have to tell you, the procedures in the House of Commons still seem somewhat antiquated to me now, but none of the bills seem to be quite as exciting as a Stockton and Darlington Railway bill. But that sort of innovation about the taking people on the line as well. At the time that they were saying that they would take people on the line, there were still a lot of technical challenges that hadn't been solved either, because they were sort of kind of like even surveying the line was a difficulty, wasn't it? You know.
Well, as Chris said, I mean, it wasn't just a straightforward process. They didn't suddenly think we're going to build a railway and it's going to have passengers and steam locomotives. It took a huge gestation period where the good merchants and businessmen of Stockton and Darlington argued over a canal. Then it was going to be a simple plateway, which is a bit like a rattly tin track, which was surveyed by a chap called George Overton, which would have gone following contours all over the place, horse-powered. And they finally get this Act of Parliament in 1823, which in many ways defines the modern railway. You know, it's going to be 4-foot, 8.5-inch gauge, it's going to be locomotive powered, it's going to carry mixed goods and passengers. And that and the earlier Act, which has a huge long list of things they're going to carry, are a bit like manifestos for what the modern railway should be. And again, it's that business acumen, ingenuity, forward thinking. And crucially, unlike these earlier ones, it actually says we're going to have a main line and branches. Which is getting across the fact this is the beginning of a transport system, infrastructure, which will continue to expand. Edward Pease, who's the man who keeps dipping into his pocket to finance a lot of this, he keeps coming up with, together with Stephenson, the driving force for it. That this is going to be something which will cover the country. He talks about the Edinburgh and London being connected and the mail being delivered overnight. Francis Mewburn, a few years later, when they're opening the Croft Branch line, talks about people having lunch in Darlington and going to the opera in London. Whether anybody ever has done is a moot point.
Sounds like a perfect day out.
But it's this visionary thing. And the Act of Parliament is a hugely expensive thing in its own right. King George III dies inconveniently, which delays it. But it gives them effectively statutory powers to purchase the length of the line, sort of compulsory purchase powers, which other early railways didn't really think through. They tried to pay each individual landowner and went bankrupt after a few years. So again, the S&DR is just constantly evolving thinking and driving it forward.
And so it confronts problems that now seem quite obvious to us, but in those days had never been confronted before because no one had moved kind of passengers on a line before. So if you are going to move passengers on a line, well, what sort of accommodation do passengers need? And no one had kind of really worked that out before. And so it's not until the day before the opening of the railway that Robert Stephenson and Co. in Newcastle delivers the world's first passenger coach carriage called Experiment, which was in the reenactment.
It was. I mean, I think the fact that Stephenson decided to call the carriage Experiment maybe suggests he wasn't that confident about this.
I think to the contrary. I mean, it was a Stockton Darlington Railway decision as much as Stephenson that this was the great experiment of modern times, and they were going to make it work, but the whole thing was an experiment.
And it seems obvious to us that people need a carriage because before, and most of the people on opening day are just clinging to the sides of trucks full of coal and tumbling off, falling underneath.
Overcrowded train, yes, here in the northeast. Yeah.
So, but someone has to kind of invent that. So, if we're going to move lots of people on a railway, what do they need? Well, they need a bit of a roof. We're not going to put any windows in it by the looks of things.
They did have glass windows in it. The reason there weren't windows in the replica. And this is a long story involving Network Rail and the Office of Rail Regulation about how you can get a replica onto main line. Originally, they told us it couldn't have glass in the windows. But very shortly before it was due to actually go on the line, they said we couldn't have passengers in it because it didn't have glass in the windows. So dealing with Network Rail has been an interesting... they've been ultimately hugely supportive to get it actually on mainline rail. But yes, it was quite a comfortable coach. Didn't have springs originally, but it did have glass in the windows, and it did have, as well as the directors of the Stockton Darlington Railway, and it had the chairman of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway forthcoming, the Liverpool Birmingham. So they were attracting lots of people who were thinking of building railways here.
Yeah, on opening day there was William Strickland from America, and he's the bloke who's credited with taking the railways back to America. And
so the world was really watching Stockton and Darlington at that time. Then,
The lead up to the opening day is the bit everyone focuses on because there's lots of fantastic stories about how it was built. Well, you do your Coach of Gold story if you want to. But the 5 years afterwards, when they demonstrated that this thing worked and it made a profit, because if it hadn't made a profit, things could have been delayed by years. But as Chris has said, Strickland from America, Van Oenhausen and Drecken from Prussia, the Sagan brothers from France, they all came here, saw what the S&DR were doing, and went back and started building railways in all these countries first. So by the time the Liverpool and Manchester opened, as the first it's a sort of a perfected railway based on everything the S&DR has developed in 1830. The rest of the world's building railways already.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned the Liverpool and Manchester one, and I upset quite a number of people in the Northwest, deliberately, I have to say, at a dinner recently by pointing out to them that they may have had the world's first intercity railway, because I have to concede that Stockton and Darlington aren't cities. However, the first passenger railway was here, and to prove it, I round off the list of first, some of the firsts. That we have here, of course, the world's first railway station, passenger railway station.
That's another good example of the blindingly obvious. But what do passengers need if they're going to kind of get a ticket? Where are they going to get onto a train? Because there's no stopping, or you just kind of hail it and it kind of stops. But no, we need to formalise it. We need to put a roof. Perhaps they want to buy a beer or something. And
world's first railway pub in Yarm.
Yes, the New Inn.
By Thomas Lane.
So all these things are
all the
obvious.
essentials.
They're all obvious to us today. But every railway station in the world can trace itself back to Hyington Station.
Yes. Which is still there, of course.
Which the Friends have just acquired.
Oh, I didn't realise that. That's fantastic news.
So it was Grade 2 listed, and no one really appreciated why it was important. It was just an interesting early building. But together with Historic England, we did research, which has led to a lot of the S&DR buildings along the line. You mentioned about the Cleveland Bay at the end of the Yarm branch line being listed or upgraded. So Hyington got upgraded to 2-star based on the fact it's the first proper designed railway station. It's amateurish, it doesn't do the full job, but it's the first proper built railway station. And we've been round the houses trying to get funding to acquire it because it's been stood empty for 7 years, gradually getting vandalised. We did a crowdsourcing thing which got us quite a lot of money, a few small grants, but then Hitachi Rail, which is literally just on the other side of the line, building the world's newest trains, they stepped in with a fantastic donation, which allowed us to buy it. So hopefully over the next 2 years, for its bicentenary in 2027, you'll be able to come and visit a perfectly preserved Georgian railway inn and
That'd
feel
be
like
great.
you're back in the day.
I'll definitely do that. And you, as you mentioned Hitachi, I think it's kind of nice to mention that too. Of course, railways is still very much part of what we do here in our region. And in a way, we kind of have two railway factories. We have Hitachi, but we also have in Darlington, we have the steam railway people as well who make the odd engine there. But Hitachi, I mean, you're right, they've been a superb supporter of the local area and of this festival. But they were telling me that the brand new Azumas that they make, they roll out of their factory and join the main line along the route of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. So it's still in use, that the route essentially, if not the original rails, obviously. But
I mean they've said as well, they had a fantastic sort of celebratory dinner over the period of the festival. And they had the Japanese ambassador and various others, all quite blatantly stating that one of the reasons they picked that site for the plant was the heritage angle. Because if you go to railway museums around the world or find out what people are taught in schools, they're taught the Stockton and Darlington Railway is the place the modern railway began. So, with all due nods to our friends at Liverpool and Manchester, who built a very nice railway.
Yes, although it's very nice, very, very nice.
Although technically, Liverpool and Manchester weren't cities in 1830. They were, but they weren't officially cities. But it means something to people around the world. It's not just a local thing. In fact, I think in some ways, we'll be celebrating the bicentenary, but we don't do enough about the railway heritage here. It's a unique selling point for businesses and communities in this area, and we really ought to keep teaching our children to be really proud of it.
Well, you're right. I think we should absolutely be really proud of it.
And Stockton's got a great opportunity as it opens its quayside up again to actually mark the terminus properly at the end of the line there.
Yeah, you're right. So I was down at that sort of building that's there, which would have been the original, I guess, ticket office or whatever it was. But the building predates the railway. You might have seen
St John's Well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and there is a little sort of notice board there and so on. But but you're right. People just pass by.
Yeah, and then it runs from there down actually to the river, because the whole point is getting coal onto the river. But there's nothing. Stockton doesn't have anything down there at the moment.
Yeah. So I think you're right. We could do more of that and let people know that. But I think also there's something really inspiring about the people who were involved as well. So you mentioned, Pease. I mean, clearly he had the money and he was able to finance it, but he bought into a vision as well, and he just charged ahead with it. And I heard this kind of interesting story, because you kind of think how Stephenson got involved in this, and I think I might have read it in your book actually, the story of how Stephenson came involved. Maybe you could, because you know this better than me.
Well, yeah. So my version of the story, and I always preface it with that, is April the 19th, 1821. Pease is at home in Darlington, in his house, which is now a pizza parlour, which is a bit embarrassing, but never mind. He's waiting for news that the bill has got royal assent in London, in the House of the Commons, and Stephenson almost unilaterally has decided that he's got to come down and persuade these people who are planning this corridor of communication that it's going to be steam power and not horsepower that's going to power the line. And he gets the stagecoach from Newcastle with his mate Nicholas Wood down to Stockton, and then they walk along the course of the line from Stockton into Darlington, so that when they get to meet Mr. Pease, they know the topography of the lie of the land that they're going to tell him. It's going to be steam power operating on there. There are two versions of the story. One version of the story says that Stephenson is so poor that he walks from Stockton to Darlington barefoot to save on the shoe leather. And outside Domino's Pizza Parlour, there's a huge boulder, and there's a painting in Darlington Library of him putting his shoes on the boulder and then walking over the road and knocking on Mr. Pease's door. The other version of the story says they walk from Stockton to Darlington wearing their shoes, but they got rather muddy. And so when they get to the big boulder opposite the pizza parlour, they take their shoes off. And that's what the painting in Darlington Library shows, them taking the shoes off. But they knocked on Mr. Pease's door, either barefoot or not. It didn't really matter. He didn't have any appointments that day, and they were kicked out into the night and without seeing him. But he heard the commotion. He was upstairs waiting for the great news from London. So he comes rushing downstairs as a Quaker gentleman can rush, with his coat tails flapping and his hat wobbling about, I imagine. And ushered them in, and so they go into his kitchen. I think if they'd had a proper appointment, they would have gone into the parlour possibly, but they go into the kitchen of his house, and there the father of the railways meets the father of the locomotives, and it is steam power, not horsepower, and that really makes the Stockton and Darlington Railway so important, that decision to adopt the latest technology.
So Stephenson must have been very convincing, but also Pease clearly had a lot of vision.
And a lot of bravery, I think, because one of the other stories that I tell is that in 1815, up at Sunderland, at Houghton-le-Spring, a steam horse had been built, and it was literally a steam horse by a chap called William Bruton from Derbyshire, and it had two rear horses' legs that went up and down somehow and pushed the main body of the engine forward, and it exploded.
We should have had more of those.
Yeah, I know. I would love to see how that
We
worked.
should definitely have had more of those.
He's travelling to Parliament on a regular basis on one of those. No. I mean, I'm glad
But it exploded anyhow, and it killed 14 people.
Oh my goodness!
So that's 1815. Yeah. So for them to then start adopting this technology that is blowing up and killing people on a massive
scale, the pace of the development
is
was
quite
immense,
brave, I think.
Yeah, so I'm glad Chris has acknowledged that what he's just told you was a story, because it's a fantastic story, and I'm not quite sure when it seeped into public consciousness, but we now know that Stephenson has been working at Killingworth Colliery from 1812 onwards, designing engines which work quite reliably. He's beginning to get a reputation for it. He's already been employed to build the Hetton Railway, which is the first one to be designed to use steam from the outset.
And that's longer, isn't it?
It's a mineral railway. It's never designed. They've got no ambitions the way the S&DR put things together, and he's building that from the early 1820s. So Edward Pease is no mug. He knows about what Stephenson is doing, and I couldn't quote it now, but we're pretty sure that there is correspondence between the two of them. So whether he turned up unannounced with Nicholas Wood and he was a bit muddy, Pease was expecting him, and Edward Pease was an incredibly sound businessman. He wouldn't have thrown his money. He wouldn't have thrown his money in unless he'd really thought it through. And he did visit Killingworth to actually see the engines.
After the meeting.
And Stephenson, I understand as well, he had to build the world's first railway factory as well, in order to, or a locomotive engine factory.
Well, again, this is another example of the S&DR thinking big. That in 1824, George Stephenson actually sets himself up officially as the world's first railway consultant. That dread thing, as a consult, because he's getting work everywhere based on what he's doing in the northeast. But importantly, in 1823, they set up Robert Stephenson and Co., so George's son, as an independent manufacturer of railway locomotives at 4th Street in Newcastle, because they know the S&DR is going to need engines, but clearly they know that if they're successful, the rest of the world and the country is going to need it. So this will be a huge business opportunity. It nearly comes adrift because Robert Stephenson, ungrateful man that he is, clears off to South America to work in silver mines. So he's not actually around for this new company that's been set up for him. But it's Pease in particular and what's he called? Michael Longridge, another investor in the S&DR, who are the main financial backers of Robert Stephenson.
And what they had clearly is that they had money, drive, vision, and kind of a sort of determination to get this done. But one thing they didn't have were people who knew how to do it. And I think when you think of some of the great opportunities we've got in our local region now, like small modular reactors in Hartlepool, carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, all sustainable aviation fuel, lots of things I talk about, new industries. And people sometimes wonder, well, will we be able to do it? How will we be able to do it? How will we have the skills to do it? I think for me, a big lesson from the past is sometimes you've just got to press on and do it and believe in your own vision and believe in the future and just be determined to tackle any of the challenges.
I think if there's one big lesson for local people from the S&DR, it's seizing opportunity. As you say, there was no schools turning out engineers, which was an interesting difference with the Americans, because the Americans were largely from military universities, and they came over and met all these self-made men who taught themselves how to make steam engines. It's a real clash of cultures in terms of that. But locally, people set within a couple of years, within a year or so of the S&DR, people were setting up foundries, manufactories, and just building stuff to supply the S&DR. So there was a huge burst in socio-economic activity. And on another line, the passenger thing, they had to make money quickly. They had a limited number of engines, so the passenger side of it got, forgive the pun, sidelined, and they decided to franchise it out. And the people who responded to that were the people who ran inns, taverns, and had run some of the stagecoach network. So here in Stockton, Martha Howson, who ran the Black Lion, Her husband had died some years before, so she was the driving force behind it. She owned land which the SNDR bought to build part of the line. But she took on the passenger service from Stockton. You know, she ran the coaches, she sold the tickets, she got people into her inn and things. So all these people really took
great entrepreneurial
absolutely
spirit,
huge entrepreneurial skill. They saw which way the wind was blowing and they made the most of it.
Yeah. And I've got another story from Shildon, 1826, where I think a publican sells a return ticket to his punters for a day out in Stockton, and his return ticket includes admission to Stockton races. So that's the world's first package holiday, in effect.
Yeah, absolutely. So never mind Thomas Cook. It was a publican from Shildon who did the world's first package holiday.
But no one had thought really, why would people, why do ordinary working class people want to travel? And there's just no means for them to cheaply and quickly travel. And yet it opens up a completely unheard of leisure industry.
Yeah. It's a bit like the old another story, Henry Ford quote, isn't it? If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Because sometimes you have to just produce something and people will go for it. I think there'll be lots of people listening to this who might have not known so much about the Stockton and Darlington Railway, might want to find out more about it. And if they do, I would have thought the Friends of the Stockton and Darlington Railway would be a good place to start. So how could people get in touch with you or find out more about the Friends? You got a website they could go to?
Indeed, who hasn't got a website these days? So if you just Google Friends of the SNDR, you'll find our website. There's a Facebook group as well, which over the course of the festival has grown exponentially from people all over the place wanting to join in. And we really hope people do, because this shouldn't be a once in 50-year activity. There are buildings to restore, there's business opportunities just as there was in 1825. We've got people who like it because of family history, people who like steam valves and widgets, people who like architecture. It's a big group of people. So,
and sorry, Niall, the anniversary should really roll on, I think. This is just the starting point. There are lots of little branch lines to celebrate in the next 5 years, but the big one is the way that Stockton Darlington Railway bridges the River Tees at Stockton with the world's first railway suspension bridge, and then creates a new port on the other side that it calls Port Darlington, which grows up into the magnificent metropolis that is now Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of 5 years away, Middlesbrough's 200th.
So I was going to ask you, Chris, where you're going to go next, what's your next project, but maybe it's about the development of Middlesbrough. We could do that. But we also mustn't forget as well, next year, in 2026, is the 200th anniversary of the invention of the friction match, which took place on the high street here in Stockton. And one of the first clients for these new friction matches was indeed the Stockton and Darlington Railway. Of course, it's a lot easier to start your engine first thing in the early hours of the morning if you have a friction match to light the fire, rather than flint and steel or whatever it was they were using previously.
Actually, the very first time they lit locomotion number one, they used a navvy's bit of glass that he always carried, because he was a big pipe smoker. His name was Robert Metcalfe, and he liked to smoke his pipe. And so he carried a bit of glass that he used to focus the rays of the sun onto his pipe so he could puff away. And he gave that bit of glass to George Stephenson, and he focused the rays of the sun into locomotion number one's boiler. So although it's regarded as very old fossil fuel technology, it was lit by solar power. So it's really
there we are,
ahead of the time.
Yes, well, there was a former National Union of My Works trade union leader who called coal fossilised solar power. So there we are. But maybe we could have a conversation about renewable energy or something at some point in the future. Well, look, thank you very much, both of you. This has been an absolute pleasure, and a conversation that I could have run on for days, if not for the 200 years of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And if anyone would like to find out more about the Stockton and Darlington Railway, do head across to the website of the Friends. And I would recommend as well checking out Chris's publications. I know you brought one along with you today, but there's so many publications and excellent articles Chris has written about local history in our area, and you can find out a lot more about that by picking up a copy of the Northern Echo from time to time too. So thank you both, and bye for now.